Solitary and forbidding, the house stared spectre-like through scraggly trees that seemed to shrink from its touch. The green moss of decay lay on its dank roofs, and the windows, set in deep cavities, peered blindly at the world as though through eyeless sockets. So forbidding was its aspect that boys, on approaching its cheerless gables, stopped their whistling and passed on the opposite side of the street. Across the fields, a few huddled cottages gazed through the falling rain, as if wondering what family could be so bold as to take up its abode within the gloomy walls of that old mansion whose carpeted floors for 2 years had not felt the tread of human feet. In an attic room of the house, 2 sisters lay in bed, but not asleep. The younger sister cringed under the dread inspired by the bleak place. The elder laughed at her childish fears, but the younger felt the spell of the old building and was afraid. "I suppose there's really nothing to frighten me in this dreary old house," she admitted without conviction in her voice. "But the very feel of the place is horrible. Mother shouldn't have left us alone in this gruesome place." "Stupid," her sister scolded. "With all the silverware downstairs, somebody has to be here for fear of burglars." "Oh, don't talk about burglars," pleaded the younger girl. "I'm afraid. I keep imagining I hear ghostly footsteps." Her sister laughed. "Go to sleep, goosey," she said. "Haunted houses are nothing but superstition. They exist only in imagination." "Why has nobody lived here for 2 years, then?" "They tell me that for 5 years every family moved out after being here just a short time. The whole atmosphere of the house is ghastly, and I can't forget how the older Berkheim, Erline, was found stabbed to death in her bed, and nobody knew how it happened. Why, she may have been murdered in this very room." "Go to sleep and don't scare yourself with such silly talk. Mother will be with us tomorrow night, and Dad will be back next day. Now go to sleep." The elder sister soon dropped into slumber, but the younger lay open-eyed, staring into the black room and shuddering at every stifled scream of the wind or distant growl of thunder. She began to count, hoping to hypnotize herself into drowsiness, but at every slight noise she started and lost her count. Suddenly she turned and shook her sister by the shoulder. "Edith, somebody is prowling around downstairs," she whispered. "Listen." "Oh, what shall we do?" The elder sister struck a match and lit the candle. Then she slipped on her dressing gown and drew on her slippers. "You're not going down there? Edith, tell me you're not going downstairs. It might be that murdered Berkheim girl. Edith, don't—" Edith shot a glance of withering scorn at her sister, who lay on the bed with blanched face and wide, terrified eye. "There is something moving around downstairs, and I'm going to find out what it is," she said. Taking the candle, she left the room. Her younger sister lay in the darkness, listening to the pattering of rain on the roof and straining her ears to catch the slightest sound. The noise downstairs ceased, but the wind rose and the rain beat upon the roof in sudden furious blasts that made her heart jump wildly. 10 minutes passed, 20 minutes, and Edith had not returned. A door slammed, and the younger sister thought she heard something moving again, but the wind began to sob and drowned out all other noises. Between gusts, she heard the portentous sound, and each time it seemed nearer. Then she started as she realized that something was coming up the stairs. Once she thought she heard a cry, to which the wind joined its plaintive voice in a weird duet. Nearer and nearer the strange noise came. It mounted the stairs, step by step, heard only when the wind and rain softened their voices. It passed the first landing and moved slowly up the second flight, while the girl fearfully awaited its coming. The wind howled until the house quaked. It shrilled past the eaves and fled across the fields like a hunted ghost. And now the girl's pounding pulses drowned out the screaming of the wind, for the presence had invaded her bedroom. She cowered under the covers, a cold perspiration chilling her body until her teeth chattered. Her imagination conjured up frightful things. A disembodied spirit come to destroy her. A corpse from the grave, gibbering in terror because it could not tear the cerements from its face. The murdered Berkheim girl, with the knife still sheathed in her heart. Or some escaped beast licking its lips in greedy anticipation of the feast her tremulous body would provide. Or was it a murderer who, having killed her sister, was now bent on completing his bloody work? A flash of lightning split the sky, and the thunder bellowed its terrifying warning. The girl threw back the bedclothes and shrank to the wall, her eyes staring from their sockets, fearful lest another flash reveal some sight too ghastly to contemplate. Slowly the being dragged itself across the floor, lifted itself onto the bed, and uttered a choking sound of agony. The girl sat petrified. Then, timorously, she extended a shaky hand, but quickly withdrew it in dread of some hideous contact. Again she thrust her trembling hand into the gloom, farther, farther, until it touched something shaggy and wet. A clammy hand closed over hers, and she started to her feet with a horrified scream. The icy hand tightened with a sickening tremor and dragged her down. Then her tortured senses gave way, and she fell back unconscious upon the bed. When she awoke, it was day. Beside her on the bed lay the bleeding body of her sister, Edith, stabbed in the breast by the burglar she had tried to frighten away. The younger girl was clutching the clotted wisps of hair that had fallen across the breast of her sister, whose cold hand had closed over hers in the last convulsive shudder of death. The argument that I had with my brother in his great lonely house will scarcely interest my readers, not those, at least, whom I hope may be attracted by the experiment that I undertook, and by the strange things that befell me in that hazardous region into which so lightly and so ignorantly I allowed my fancy to enter. It was at Onolly that I had visited him. Now Onolly stands in a wide isolation, in the midst of a dark gathering of old whispering cedars. They nod their heads together when the north wind comes, and nod again, and agree, and furtively grow still again, and say no more a while. The north wind is to them like a nice problem among wise old men. They nod their heads over it, and mutter about it all together. They know much, those cedars, they've been there so long. Their grandsires knew Lebanon, and the grandsires of these were the servants of the king of Tyre, and came to Solomon's court. And amidst these black-haired children of grey-headed time stood the old house of Onoli. I know not how many centuries had lashed against it their evanescent foam of years, but it was still unshattered, and all about it were the things of long ago, as cling strange growths to some sea-defying rock. Here, like the shells of long-dead limpets, was armor that men encased themselves in long ago. Here, too, were tapestries of many colors, beautiful as seaweed. No modern flotsam ever drifted hither, no early Victorian furniture, no electric light. The great trade routes that littered the years with empty meat tins and cheap novels were far from here. Well, well, the centuries will shatter it and drive its fragments on to distant shores. Meanwhile, while it yet stood, I went on a visit there to my brother, and we argued about ghosts. My brother's intelligence on this subject seemed to me to be in need of correction. He mistook things imagined for things having an actual existence. He argued that second-hand evidence of persons having seen ghosts proved ghosts to exist. I said that even if they had seen ghosts, this was no proof at all. Nobody believes that there are red rats, though there is plenty of first-hand evidence of men having seen them in delirium. Finally, I said I would see ghosts myself, and continue to argue against their actual existence. So I collected a handful of cigars and drank several cups of very strong tea and went without dinner and retired into a room where there was dark oak and all the chairs were covered with tapestry. And my brother went to bed bored with our argument and trying hard to dissuade me from making myself uncomfortable. All the way up the old stairs, as I stood at the bottom of them, and as his candle went winding up and up, I heard him still trying to persuade me to have supper and go to bed. It was a windy winter, and outside the cedars were muttering I know not what about, but I think they were Tories of a school long dead, and were troubled about something new. Within, a great damp log upon the fireplace began to squeak and sing, and struck up a whining tune, and a tall flame stood over it and beat time, and all the shadows crowded round and began to dance. In distant corners old masses of darkness sat like chaperones and never moved. Over there, in the darkest part of the room, stood a door that was always locked. It led into the hall, but no one ever used it. Near that door, something had happened once of which the family are not proud. We do not speak of it. There in the firelight stood the venerable forms of the old chairs. The hands that had made their tapestries lay far beneath the soil. The needles with which they wrought were many separate flakes of rust. No one wove now in that old room, no one but the assiduous ancient spiders who, watching by the deathbed of things of yore, worked shrouds to hold their dust. In shrouds about the cornices already lay the heart of the oak wainscot that the worm had eaten out. Surely at such an hour, in such a room, a fancy already excited by hunger and strong tea might see the ghosts of former occupants. I expected nothing less. The fire flickered and the shadows danced. Memories of strange historic things rose vividly in my mind. But midnight chimed solemnly from a 7-foot clock, and nothing happened. My imagination would not be harried, and the chill that is with the small hours had come upon me, and I had nearly abandoned myself to sleep, when in the hall adjoining there arose the rustling of silk dresses that I had waited for and expected. Then there entered, 2 by 2, the high-born ladies and their gallants of Jacobean times. They were little more than shadows, very dignified shadows, and almost indistinct. But you have all read ghost stories before. You have all seen in museums the dresses of those times. There is little need to describe them. They entered, several of them, and sat down on the old chairs, perhaps a little carelessly considering the value of the tapestries. Then the rustling of their dresses ceased. Well, I had seen ghosts, and was neither frightened nor convinced that ghosts existed. A herd of black creatures. I was about to get up out of my chair and go to bed when there came a sound of pattering in the hall, a sound of bare feet coming over the polished floor, and every now and then a foot would slip, and I heard claws scratching along the wood as if some four-footed thing lost and regained its balance. I was not frightened, but uneasy. The pattering came straight towards the room that I was in. Then I heard the sniffing of expectant nostrils. Perhaps uneasy was not the most suitable word to describe my feelings then. Suddenly a herd of black creatures, larger than bloodhounds, came galloping in. They had large pendulous ears. Their noses were to the ground, sniffing. They went up to the lords and ladies of long ago and fawned about them disgustingly. Their eyes were horribly bright and ran down to great depths. When I looked into them, I knew suddenly what these creatures were, and I was afraid. They were the sins, the filthy, immortal sins of those courtly men and women. How demure she was, the lady that sat near me on an old-world chair. How demure she was, and how fair to have beside her, with its jowl upon her lap, a sin with such cavernous red eyes, a clear case of murder. And you, yonder lady with the golden hair, surely not you, and yet that fearful beast with the yellow eyes slinks from you to yonder courtier there, and whenever one drives it away, it slinks back to the other. Over there a lady tries to smile as she strokes the loathsome furry head of another's sin, but one of her own is jealous and intrudes itself under her hand. Here sits an old nobleman with his grandson on his knee, and one of the great black sins of the grandfather is licking the child's face, and has made the child its own. Sometimes a ghost would move and seek another chair, but always his pack of sins would move behind him. Poor ghosts, poor ghosts! How many flights they must have attempted for 200 years from their hated sins! How many excuses they must have given for their presence! And the sins were with them still, and still unexplained. Suddenly one of them seemed to scent my living blood and bayed horribly, and all the others left their ghosts at once and dashed up to the sin that had given tongue. The brute had picked up my scent near the door by which I had entered, and they moved slowly nearer to me, sniffing along the floor, and uttering now and then their fearful cry. I saw that the whole thing had gone too far, but now they had seen me, now they were all about me. They sprang up, trying to reach my throat, and whenever their claws touched me, horrible thoughts came into my mind, and unutterable desires dominated my heart. I planned bestial things as these creatures leaped around me, and planned them with a masterly cunning. A great red-eyed murder was among the foremost of those furry things from whom I feebly strove to defend my throat. Suddenly it seemed to me good that I should kill my brother. It seemed important to me that I should not risk being punished. I knew where a revolver was kept. After I had shot him, I would dress the body up and put flour on the face like a man that had been acting as a ghost. It would be very simple. I would say that he had frightened me, and the servants had heard us talking about ghosts. There were one or two trivialities that would have to be arranged, but nothing escaped my mind. Yes, it seemed to me very good that I should kill my brother as I looked into the red depths of this creature's eyes. But one last effort as they dragged me down. If two straight lines cut one another, I said, the opposite angles are equal. Let AB, CD cut one another at E, then the angles CEA, CEB equal two right angles. Also CEA, AED equal two right angles. I moved towards the door to get the revolver. A hideous exultation arose among the beasts. But the angle CEA is common, therefore AED equals CEB. In the same way CEA equals DEB. QED. It was proved. Logic and reason re-established themselves in my mind. There were no dark hounds of sin. The tapestried chairs were empty. It seemed to me an inconceivable thought that a man should murder his brother. The Closing Hand, written by Farnsworth Wright. The Ghosts, written by Lord Dunsany. Told to you by Edward E. French. A copyright exists on all recordings issued by Edward E. French. Inquiries should be addressed to Permissions Manager at email edwardfrench06@hotmail.com. Good night. Pleasant dreams.